September 10th. The main news of this morning is being summarized by the TSN team. Channel 1+1 is with you on the air as part of the National Marathon, the largest missile attack in the last 4 months. For 11 hours, the Russians attacked our country with missiles and Shaheds. Also, tonight, Russian drones once again crossed the country's border. Hundreds of drones and dozens of caliber missiles, as well as X-101 and X-59 missiles launched from strategic aviation aircraft, were present in our skies. Accordingly, air raid alerts were announced across the entire country. And at night, explosions were heard in Kyiv, Lviv, Lutsk, Vinnytsia, Zhytomyr, and in Prikarpatia. Fires broke out at the sites where the missiles struck. But the enemy did not limit itself to Ukraine this night. They also attacked Poland. More than a dozen drones entered the country's airspace. Polish aviation shot them down. Poland closed several airports to flights, including those in Warsaw, Lublin, and also in Rzeszów. In the morning, the Polish Ministry of Defense acknowledged that drones had entered the country's airspace and urged Poles in several border voivodeships to stay at home while the attack was ongoing. Donald Tusk later reported that the army had opened fire on aerial objects but did not mention their specifically Russian origin. Due to the overnight fighting, an emergency meeting of the Polish Security Council was held. The NATO Secretary General was also in contact with Warsaw. We will talk more about the results of the meeting, the overall reaction, and the mood in Poland later in this edition of TSN. In particular, we are waiting for a live connection with our colleagues who are working there. Meanwhile, the president of Ukraine has already responded to the massive overnight missile and drone attack by the Russians, which also targeted Poland. According to Volodymyr Zelensky, Moscow is always testing the limits of what is possible, and if it does not encounter a strong response, it remains at a new level of escalation, the president wrote on Telegram. He noted that today's attack was yet another step toward escalation as Iranian Shaheds attacked a NATO country. Zelensky called the actions of the Russians extremely dangerous for Europe. In his opinion, Russia must be held accountable for this and, quote, must now feel that the war cannot be expanded and will have to be brought to an end. Delaying sanctions means more strikes, he emphasized, adding that there must be a strong joint response from Ukraine, Poland, all Europeans, and the United States. 3 people were injured as a result of the Russian attack on Khmelnytsky region. 1 man is in critical condition in intensive care. 2 others are in the trauma unit. There, the occupiers destroyed a sewing factory, damaged the bus station and vehicles, and windows were shattered in nearby houses. In the Zhytomyr region, there is a casualty from a combined attack. In the regional center, a man with severe burns was taken to the hospital, but they were unable to save him. 5 more civilians are in the hospital and nearly 30 people required psychological assistance. Several civilian businesses and homes have been destroyed. Rescuers and sappers are working at the scene. In Volyn, emergency workers spent the night extinguishing a large fire at a business near Lutsk. The fire, which broke out after the shelling, engulfed an area of 1,000 square meters. There were no casualties. In Lviv, a civilian warehouse was destroyed during the night attack. According to Mayor Andriy Sadovye, the Russians launched about 60 Shaheds and more than 10 cruise missiles at the city. No people were injured. In Vinnytsia region, hits on civilian industrial facilities and residential buildings were also recorded. 2 wounded people were taken to the hospital. 1 person was outside during the shelling while the other was in a basement. Several dozen houses were damaged with windows shattered and roofs torn off. In total, 26 drones and 11 missiles were present in the region's airspace, according to the military administration.
A total of 81 personnel and more than 20 pieces of essential equipment were actively involved in successfully containing the extensive fire. Furthermore, there was a direct strike on a civilian industrial facility, and significant residential infrastructure was also severely damaged. In addition, more than 30 individual houses were damaged.
Another crime by the Russians against the civilian population, the lives of 3 people who are still in critical condition after the Russian strike on the village of Yarova in Donetsk region are being saved by doctors. The wounded are planned to be transported to hospitals in the city of Dnipro. Another 7 people are in moderate condition. It is already known that the occupiers dropped a high-explosive aerial bomb directly into a crowd. Mined roads and drones overhead. Under such conditions, Kherson police officers evacuated a 70-year-old woman from the frontline village of Havrilivka. The village head asked the police to evacuate the pensioner from the shelling to her relatives. Law enforcement officers carefully planned the rescue operation at night, since the front line is very close and it is extremely dangerous during the day. They helped the villager quickly pack her belongings, but didn't expect such a large amount because in addition to her usual things, she also wanted to take a considerable harvest of onions with her. In the end, they convinced the woman to leave the vegetables behind and successfully transported her to a safer place.
Well, that worked. Give me the pillow. Whatever's packed in there. All right, Grandma, come on, get in the car quickly.
Grandma, we'll give you some onions there. We could all end up staying here just for your onions. Don't you understand?
Please get in quickly and efficiently.
And Germany will provide Ukraine with 2 additional Patriot systems and strengthen the long-range drone program. This was announced by German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius at the start of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting in London. The anniversary, already the 30th, Ramstein meeting is underway there. The first launchers of the additional Patriot systems have already been delivered to Ukraine. Half of the cost was covered by Norwegian partners. In addition, Germany, together with Britain, plan to sign a number of contracts with Ukrainian long-range drone manufacturers for 300 million euros. This means several thousand deep-strike drones, so that our manufacturers can further supply Ukrainian defense forces with these UAVs. This very weapon, as well as air defense systems and sanctions against Russia, are critically important for supporting Ukraine, stated Ukraine's head of the defense ministry, Denis Shmyhal, who is also present at the Ramstein meeting. Ukraine currently needs at least 10 Patriot systems as well as missiles for air defense launchers. In addition, there is a need not only for long-range drones, but also for drones capable of intercepting Russian Shaheds and FPVs. To hold the front and produce such drones, Ukrainian manufacturers need at least $6 billion. The Minister of Defense stated that among the key objectives of the meeting are to ensure uninterrupted military and financial assistance to Ukraine, to strengthen air defense and to develop joint defense industry production. The Kremlin is losing its last clients in Europe. Hungary has signed a 10-year gas supply contract with Shell, the country's foreign minister Péter Szijjártó announced. Gas from the new supplier will be delivered to Hungary via German and Czech pipelines starting in 2026. Szijjártó also added that Budapest is in talks with several other potential suppliers. The search for alternatives is taking place against the backdrop of the EU's intention to completely phase out Russian gas by the end of 2027. Budapest, which is the last major buyer of Russian energy resources in Europe, has long opposed such intentions, but recently the Hungarians have begun to take steps toward diversifying their supplies. And most likely we should also thank the Ukrainian defense forces who struck Russian transit energy facilities, including the Druzhba oil pipeline. The murder of 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska in the United States is at the center of a political confrontation. President Donald Trump recorded a special address. Attorney General Pam Bondi stated that federal charges have been brought against the attacker. He could face a life sentence or even the death penalty. Meanwhile, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson accused leading American media outlets of covering up this story. Why has this issue taken on such a pronounced political tone? In fact, TSN's correspondent in the United States, Olha Koshelenko, will explain in detail.
23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska was returning home from work around 10 o'clock in the evening on a commuter train in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sitting behind her was 35-year-old African-American DeCarlos Brown. The investigation established that the attacker and the victim did not know each other, but he pulled a knife from his pocket and suddenly inflicted 3 wounds on the young woman, resulting in Zarutska's death. Although all this happened back on August 22nd, the surveillance footage from the train was released last weekend. It caught the attention of Donald Trump. The president first made a separate post on Truth Social, where he called the attacker mentally ill. The man has indeed been diagnosed with schizophrenia. The police have detained him 14 times for various offenses. The last time he was released was in January. On Tuesday, the president recorded a separate video from the Oval Office, holding portraits of Zarutska and Brown in his hands.
Here is a photograph, and here is a photograph of the woman, a beautiful young girl who never had any problems in her life.
An FBI special agent, barely containing his emotion, told the briefing what Zarutska was like, a refugee from Kiev who, together with her family, fled the war to the United States.
Irina settled into our community. She made friends and immediately found a job. On the very first day she was allowed to work, when she received her work permit, she found a job that same day. She worked at a senior center, worked at a pizzeria, and took care of animals. She was building her young life. She recently moved in with her partner.
In addition to a psychiatric diagnosis, the attacker has a long record of offenses, from domestic violence to armed robbery and breaking into other people's homes. He was detained. Carlos Brown is currently in custody. The day before federal charges were brought against him.
The maximum penalty for this federal crime is life imprisonment without a possibility of parole, or the ultimate penalty of the death penalty for this grave offense.
But in this seemingly straightforward story, a political subtext has emerged. Media outlets close to the Republicans and even Speaker of the House Mike Johnson accused pro-democratic media of deliberately keeping quiet about the murder case of the Ukrainian refugee.
What amazes me is that if you only read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other leading publications, you won't learn about Irina's shocking story. For some reason, many news outlets refuse to cover this. Axios shamelessly claims that this is, and I quote, fuel for the MAGA agenda.
In recent months, for Donald Trump, it really has been all about fighting crime in the streets. Moreover, according to Trump, most of the crime is concentrated in cities run by his political opponents, the Democrats. In Charlotte, where Zarutska was killed, the mayor is a Democrat. Previously, Trump deployed federal forces to supposedly liberate major cities like Washington and Chicago from crime.
We cannot allow criminal elements to continue spreading destruction and death across our country. We must respond with strength and determination. We must be as tough as they are. That's the only thing they understand.
Trump claims that he has already defeated street crime in the capital. He has repeatedly said that people used to be afraid to go out on the streets in Washington, even though the crowded streets and venues suggested otherwise. But to back up his words, the president, together with his closest associates, had dinner at a respectable restaurant near the White House the previous evening. From Washington in the United States, Olha Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN on Papsville Marathon. United News.
Polish territorial defense soldiers have been asked to be ready to report to their assembly points on shorter notice. This primarily concerns the eastern border regions. The announcement came after Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace last night. Let me remind you, this already led to an emergency meeting of the Polish Security Council. The NATO Secretary General was also in contact with Warsaw. Polish aviation shot down foreign drones last night. Several airports were closed to flights, including those in Warsaw, Lublin, and also in Rzeszów. Polish Prime Minister Tusk reported that the army had opened fire on aerial objects. However, he did not mention their specifically Russian origin. And in the morning, Polish media already showed the first consequences of this drone attack in the east of the country. Near Lublin, the roof of a building and a vehicle were damaged. There is every reason to believe that Russian drones crossed the Polish border deliberately. This is the opinion of the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. She called this attack the largest on European airspace since the start of Russia's full-scale war and urged for tougher sanctions against the Kremlin and increased support for Ukraine. And now we'll get more details on how Poles are reacting to this turbulent night from Radio Swoboda correspondent Natalka Wolosacka. She is live with the TSN studio from Poland. Natalka, so what is already known about the consequences of the Russian attack? Are there any new details? How were the missiles shot down and where did the debris fall? How are Poles reacting to all of this? I mean, both the country's residents and government officials. And by the way, are the airports already operating again? In short, everything you know at this moment, over to you.
Hello, Sviatoslav. The main information is that as a result of last night's incident, no one, absolutely no one, was injured. A large-scale provocation. That's how Prime Minister Donald Tusk described what happened. He added that the military passed its first test. And although the situation is very serious, there is no reason to panic. I want to emphasize that this is the first time Poland has shot down drones that entered its territory. So let's talk about how it all started. As a result of the overnight mass attack on Ukraine, at least 10 drones entered Polish airspace. This time, the military used weapons against the target. Preliminary reports indicate that the drones were shot down by Polish and allied fighter jets, but how many were downed is still unknown. Let's listen to the Prime Minister's direct statement.
We are dealing with a provocation of the highest order, but at the same time, we are in constant communication with our allies, in ongoing contact with the NATO Secretary General, so that in the coming hours, days, and beyond, we can act as cohesively as we are now and respond in the same way in the event of a similar threat. This is the first time we have had to shoot down Russian drones over the territory of a NATO country, and that is why all our allies are treating the situation very seriously.
The trajectory of the drones, their exact number, types, and whether all of them were combat drones, this information is currently unknown to us. 4 airports were closed, 2 in Warsaw, 1 in Rzeszów, and 1 in Lublin. The Prime Minister explained that the airports were closed not because of the threat of a strike on them, but to meet the needs of the military. Around 7 in the morning, it became known that, except for the Lublin airport, all the others had resumed operations. There was also a warning for residents of 3 voivodeships, Podlaski, Mazowiecki, and Lubelski, to stay at home and wait for announcements from the army and police. However, by morning, all these restrictions were lifted. The Ministry of Education reported that children could safely go to school. Now in Poland, people are asking whether this was an attack on a NATO country or a test of Poland's air defense systems. Because last week there were 2 incidents of drones crashing on Polish territory, but at that time it was reported that these were not combat drones, but most likely smuggling drones. This time, everything is different. The Prime Minister convened an emergency government meeting. At least 3 drone fragments have already been found in different locations. One of them was found in the area of Chosnovka, 20 kilometers from the Belarusian border. It was lying in a field and caused no damage. But in the Wirki commune of the Lublin voivodeship, there was an explosion. Preliminary reports say it happened because a Polish F-16 shot down a combat drone. The debris fell on a residential building, completely destroying the roof. Another drone likely crashed a few kilometers away from it. According to the authorities, no one was injured as a result of the incident. However, all primary schools in the commune have been closed for an indefinite period. Across all of Poland, the authorities have appealed to people that if they come across such drone debris or any other suspicious objects, they should not approach them, but instead inform the military or the police. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak was in London, where he had already met with several colleagues. He is returning to Ukraine, to the country, but before that, he informed NATO partners, in particular about what happened in Poland last night. Colleague.
Thank you. Just a small correction. My apologies. Natalka Volosacka, correspondent, of course, for Mediaslava TV. And just now she reported live on TSN about how last night's Russian missile and drone attack, in addition to targeting Ukraine, also involved Shaheds entering eastern Poland.